I'll send it over to Don and Diane, who will introduce our speaker for today.
Great. Thank you, Julianne. This is Diane Haynes, and I have the privilege today of fulfilling the facilitator role, which Don and I share. It's good to see you all here, and I hope that those of you who were in quarantine have gotten out of it healthfully. So it's, yeah, there's Bev Cohn there shaking her hand, yes. So, okay. It's my pleasure, like I said, to introduce Rich Pellegrin today, Dr. Rich Pellegrin, as our third speaker in this course, Meet the Composers. Rich is on the faculty at the University of Florida in the Department of Composition, Theory, and Technology. And he's also an affiliate member of the Center for Arts, Migration, and Entrepreneurship at the university. And I think you'll be hearing more about that at some point. Rich earned his PhD from the University of Washington, and he also holds degrees from Oberlin College and Kent State University. He has been described by both his colleagues and critics as a musician, a scholar, and an educator, and we are delighted to have him with us. As a jazz pianist, composer, and band leader, Rich has released 5 albums, if I'm up to date on that. His playing is noted for its intensity, conviction, and directness of expression, and has been described as having moments of pure bliss for the listener. As a jazz scholar, Rich has written extensively on Thelonious Monk and John Coltrane. He has presented his research at numerous regional, national, and international conferences. He has also published extensively and is currently working on a book entitled Analytical Approaches to Jazz, Tonal, Modal, and Beyond. He recently also served as guest editor of a special issue of the journal Jazz Perspectives, devoted to John Coltrane. Just as a special note, this multi-talented man has also been a church organist and choir master. We will have questions and answers at the end, unless Rich wishes to do it otherwise. So now I'm going to turn you over to Dr. Rich Pellegrin, and let's enjoy this hour with him. Rich, you're on.
Thank you very much. I guess you all know Don McLaughlin, so he's done his introductions before. Thank you very much, Diane. I will take questions at a couple of places in the middle of the meeting today, so you can hold your questions till then, and then I'll open it up. So thank you very much for that nice introduction. I will mention one thing, which I think I have mentioned in advance, and you may not be able to do anything about that now, but I have one little sort of soapbox that I like to get on. And this is actually more for the, the younger people that I meet these days that want to hear all their music on smartphones and laptops. It's so convenient. I'm absolutely convinced that jazz music suffers more than any music from this sort of listening, because the plucked string bass, the plucked upright bass, it has no high overtones. When you bow the bass strings, you can hear it. When we pluck it, it just kind of boom, boom. If it's really, really low, you simply can't hear it. The thing about jazz is that the bassist is usually the only person playing the root of the chord. Like, hey, we're going to play a C major chord. As a pianist, I don't play a C when they say C major. I play all these other notes, and the bassist plays a C. And you listen on a smartphone, you can't hear that C. And so I'm convinced people listen to this jazz and they don't even know what the chord progressions are. It's kind of crazy. Anyway, all that to say, at the end of the presentation, I will play 2 pieces from my quintet in Seattle. And If you have speakers on your computer, that's great. If you have earbuds, you could put them in just there for the end, or you can listen to it later or something. But anyway, that's my soapbox. I'll get off of it now. So, okay. So I'm going to talk today a lot about the relationship between, excuse me, composition and improvisation. I am these days mostly an improviser, excuse me, but I have done quite a bit of classical composition and jazz composition and pretty involved, pieces. But I did want to talk today about my more recent work, which is my solo improvisational work, and how I plan to move that forward within the context of my jazz ensemble in Seattle. So I just released last April my first solo album called Solitude, Solo Improvisations. Actually, Diane asked if it was correct. I guess my 5th record is coming out this spring, this April. So, and that will be volume 2 of this solo project called Passage, Solo Improvisations Volume 2. That'll be record number 5. So these solo piano pieces were recorded indeed at this church, this little church, beautiful place on Whidbey Island. And this kind of crazy little piano, very old piano, a lot of the notes like wouldn't play when I played them very softly, which was difficult, shall we say. And there's lots of little creaks and groans and rattles in the piano. And I couldn't remove those from the album, unfortunately. But I decided to kind of just go with it anyway. And really it becomes kind of another voice in the album, in the sound, is the sound of this piano, which really shaped what I played as well. Just the whole, ambiance of being there in the church and with this piano and just being on the island really shaped the sound of what I did. So I wanted to go back a little bit in time to how this all started, which was actually, and this is kind of funny, but I can talk about it now. So Paul Richards and I were serving on the composition committee to hire, eventually we hired Scott Lee, right? And during this search, at some point, I became very frustrated, or just something happened. Paul Richards said something about, oh, this guy, I don't remember what it was. I think Paul said something like, this guy's music is better than my music. And this guy's so great. And I was like, Paul, what are you talking about? Your music is so great. It's so much, what are you talking about? And I said, this piano piece this guy submitted, I could improvise something like that. And he's like, well, go ahead. And I stood up to go to the piano, and Leslie Odom said, he's joking. And I'm like, okay, all right. So it was just this moment, like, because I guess because he was so excited about this piano piece. And from my perspective, I just literally thought I could improvise that. Maybe not exactly that, but it just, I can't explain it. It just bothered me for I blurted that out. Then later we were having dinner with the candidates, Scott Lee, and we were just talking about that. And they said, Jana Lauer and Paul and Scott Lee were so nice. They're like, why don't you put on a concert next year? We would all love to hear you do this. Do a concert next year. And I had never done solo piano or solo improvised piano recital before. And I knew that it was something that I had wanted to do, but I just didn't feel like I don't know. It seemed very daunting. It was very daunting. But I decided that I would go ahead and put one on the books for the following fall. And I just kept working. And that summer, I did record all of these tracks. I recorded many tracks, many tracks, a few hundred. I just would go to the piano and record. And I recorded many tracks. Just, a lot of them where I could be half asleep or I might be totally not in any kind of mind frame to do it. But I just said, well, I'm just going to push record and just do this and see what I get. So I did record those that summer a couple of years ago. but anyway, this was all this solo project was something very new for me, as I said. The reason being that, okay, so I normally play with my quintet in Seattle, and we mostly play my original pieces in that quintet. So, you know, there's a lot of improvisation because it is, after all, jazz. However, there's always some kind of structure there, right? I mean, there's a tune, there's a set of chord changes, like when you play All the Things You Are or something, right? I mean, there's chord changes that you work from, and that structures things. So with the solo project, I have no plan and no pre-composed material of any kind whatsoever. And not only that, but well, I would say it works best when I am doing pure improvisation. And I'll talk more about that later. So I very specifically refuse to have any kind of plan of any sort. Now, that being said, there are approaches or ideas, material maybe that I could say I work on, like something very general, like, okay, counterpoint that's kind of free. I don't know, I mean, just sort of, there's like, you know, things that are on my mind, things that are in my fingers, but absolutely no like specific licks, no chord changes, no plan, anything like that. So the interesting thing about that is that the focus of the concert then, or of this playing, really becomes more on process rather than object. And let me explain what I mean by that. Is, well, first, so in classical music, you have a lot of objects. You have, well, a physical score, or if not a physical score, then a memorized score, right? And that makes it objectively correct or not. Also, when you play it, you know, you have to hit the right notes. You can interpret them, but there's this objective quality about it. Also, if you're playing, sure, like playing All the Things You Are or something, then there is an object. There's a set of chord changes there. There's this fixed reference that everyone is thinking about. In this case, where I don't have any chord changes or anything like that, there is no object. There simply is no object. It's just a pure process, okay? I'm going to talk more about that because I think it's actually quite interesting how that affects the music. So, yeah, so then that fall, that it was September 19, I think, I did the recital, and I'll just play maybe the first couple minutes of the recital just to give you an idea. One thing that's sort of interesting is that the concert was much different than the kind of music that I recorded at the little church on Whidbey Island, because I think maybe it was just partly the live setting and all my colleagues were there, and you know, you feel like, oh, I gotta really play some stuff or something, you know. And I think also people go to concerts, maybe you all can relate, but I think I've learned over the years that when people go to concerts, they like to hear impressive and tense, dramatic music, you know, like Bartok or something, but they don't necessarily want to hear that in their living rooms, you know. So I think we go to yeah, you know what I mean? At the concert, it's like, oh yeah, we love that, but then that's different than what we actually play like at home on our CD players. So I played very differently in the concert. And I'll start off with this though, just to give you guys a flavor of what I'm doing. This is from my website here, where a lot of these videos are. So here we go. I'll play, I guess the first 4 or 5 minutes of this. It actually gets quite more, I will say, challenging, or I don't know, aggressive later on, but I start off with some a little more consonant sort of ideas at the beginning of this highlights video, I guess. Okay. So I'll have questions in a couple minutes here, but I wanted to just talk a little bit more about, thank you. I want to talk a little bit more about this idea of the process. So I have a quote here from Keith Jarrett, who you may have heard of. He's probably the world's leading solo improvisational pianist. I don't even like to talk about him indeed, because it just is so kind of overwhelming. He's amazing. But he said, well, two things. There's this quote here. It says, he says, usually if I have an idea, it locks me in its little room and keeps me there unless I get rid of it before I put my hands on a keyboard. Now, he's also said, he's talked about, and it's Keith Jarrett, he says a lot of things. He's a great showman with saying things and just getting people interested. So I always just kind of thought, well, that sounds a little crazy, because he would say things like, well, oh no, oh shoot, I have a concert coming up later this year, a solo concert. Well, I guess I can't play piano now for the next 6 months. Huh? He can't play piano? Because he says he wants the improvisation to come from such a pure place that he can't be practicing ahead of time, other than maybe to play some Bach to keep his fingers moving. Well, I thought that all sounded just kind of crazy and, oh, that's just Keith Jarrett being Keith Jarrett, until I started doing this solo improvisational piano work for myself. And now for some people, it might not be true. But all I can tell you is that I learned that those same things are completely true for me as well. Now, I don't have the luxury of Keith Jarrett, who was a prodigy. I don't have the luxury of saying, well, I'm not going to practice for 6 months. But I do remember before this concert, it was so strange. I'd be practicing and I'd be like, oh, that was amazing. I'm going to do that in the concert. And then I was like, wait, no, I know that doesn't work. It will not work. If I say, let's do that, it will not work. And this is what he was saying is, I don't want to get ideas in my head of what I'm going to do and then try to do that, because that idea becomes an object then. It's a goal. It's a thing you're trying to do. And then you try to do it and it doesn't make sense in that context and it doesn't work. I could actually tell you a story. Maybe I don't want to. I don't know. Well, okay, I can, because it's not out there on YouTube. But the end of this concert I played at UF, I actually was quite upset, because I didn't know how to end, and I looked at the time and I realized I have to stop this concert. It's gone on really, really long, and I didn't know how to. I guess the end became like an object, like something I have to do, and something got in my head while I was playing. I thought about another concert. I played a few concerts on Whidbey Island or in Seattle, in that area, that summer. And I thought about the end of one concert that I played, and that got in my head. And I tried to do something like that. And I tried to end 3 times and it was terrible. It just did not work. And all of a sudden I'm like, this is terrible. I didn't know what to do. And finally it just ended. And I was really upset, because the concert I thought went pretty well. And then the ending, it just needed to be done. And I kept drawing it out and trying to finish it, because I was trying to do this thing that didn't make any sense for this concert, So it's really interesting. But Paul Richards always makes fun of me for this too. He says, I say, oh, my thing where I can't think about an object. And he says, oh, you mean your spiritual practice? Because he says I have this, it's like this meditation or something. I mean, I don't think of it like that, but he's just teasing me that it's so extreme. But Keith Jarrett, it's absolutely true too. So even if I think in a concert or even right before recording, I say, oh, I stopped playing, this audience needs a little something nice. How about we play something nice and pretty and E flat major and nice flowing lines? I literally cannot do it. It doesn't work. Or I could do it, but it would not be good to me. It would be really messed up and it just would not be good. I literally cannot think about anything until maybe like the second before I put my hand down. And even then, sometimes I just kind of put my hands down and let them start wiggling around. And then I just go with that. I'm not kidding. Like, I'm just like, okay, just put them down and start, because the starting is really hard. Like, okay, it's an object. It's hard to not think of anything and just start. It's the hardest thing. So yeah, and if you think about it like this too, I mean, if someone said to me, hey, next week you're going to record, okay, let's say that pretty thing in E flat major with the arpeggios and the flowing lines. If you told me next week you're going to record this and it's going to be whatever released, I would spend all week practicing the heck out of it, thinking about arpeggios, thinking about everything I could do, like, and then I would go try to do it. And it just doesn't work for me. I don't know what to say. So another little funny thing about that is that, so you might have noticed that on that last, one of those pieces that you heard there, I had paper inside the piano. That was what making that buzzing noise. And I really struggled with the idea that I would bring paper to the concert because it felt like I was making a plan. And I felt like, oh, I'm going to play paper, so it's not really improvising because I know I'm going to put paper in there. And I took me a few weeks before I realized, okay, it's just like an option that I could use the paper, and it's just like having another instrument. It'd be like if I had a marimba there, because I play percussion too, and okay, I'll play marimba now. So I just had to sort of talk myself out of the idea that it was any kind of plan, and that I might not even use it. So that's how extreme this kind of mentality gets for me. Okay, so at this point, I'd like to pause and see if you guys have any questions. I'm going to keep talking about some of these things, these process and stuff, but if you guys have some questions right now, I'd be happy to stop having me talk the whole time. I always save it for later too, so up to you.
I don't see anything yet.
Okay, cool. I'll keep going. Okay, so after I played this recital, now a very interesting thing happened, which is that the process of going through the recordings that I made started. And this ended up being very instructive. The recording of these pieces was just like the concert, like I said, where I just could not have any idea what I was doing. It was a pure process. But then I had to package all of these pure processes into a nice, marketable object, right? I had to turn that very pure process into an object. I had to choose what I considered to be the objectively best improvisations. I had to put them into a nice, beautiful order. We had to, turn it into literally an object. So that was very interesting. And the thing was, the question is, what improvisations did I choose then? And the curious answer is that I ended up choosing, in most cases, the ones that to me, I think they sounded the most like a process. And I will explain that. So, okay, I'm actually going to play for you some of these tracks right now, though, from this first album, Solitude. I will pull that up right now and I'll tell you a little more about that. So before I talk about it, I will share this with you. Here we go. So here's the Solitude page, and there you can see the cover there. Maybe I'll actually start this and I'll mute it so you can sort of see the cover images and stuff while it's going here. I'm going to mute that. There we go. There we go. And then I will start playing the album in a moment here. So I did design this particular album also to be fairly contemplative. For some reason, I'm getting cut off over there. That's a little weird, but there we go. Okay. I designed it to be a fairly contemplative and actually kind of background music, I would say. That's kind of the piano and the environment brought that out in me. this particular album anyway, I actually find it kind of hard to listen closely to these pieces. I find them, they're just kind of, I find they're good to just put on in the background, which is fine. And as I mentioned before, the piano, as you'll hear, has all these, it says right there, an unusual concert Everett grand piano from 1915. Very inconsistent action, buzzing and clicking noises. But as I said, that I thought the piano had a lot of really great character that drew me to it. So anyway, I'll go ahead and play for you now the first, I would say maybe the first 10 minutes of this album for you. So you can just relax and enjoy the music. Okay, cool. So, yeah, I like to think that that's suitable living room music. You could put it on in your living room, I think. So, yeah, now I want to talk a little bit more about composition and improvisation, still going with the same idea, the one thing that you might take away from this presentation today. So a lot of scholars, myself included, have worked very hard to problematize the dichotomy between composition and improvisation, sometimes by showing how jazz recordings can be highly structured, and that a lot of the same things that we find in classical music on a theoretical level, we can also find in jazz. So for me personally, though, I have struggled, particularly this whole couple of years working on solo improvisation has really kind of raised a lot of these issues for me, really brought them to a head. And I struggled with the idea that something like, what does it mean for something to be improvisatory? And also Tabajaro Bello, I don't know if any of you know him, one of our PhD students who just graduated at UF did a dissertation on improvisation, and we had all these conversations at his exams and everything in the faculty. It was quite interesting. And that was very helpful for me, actually, to really just analyze what the heck is going on with these things. So I struggle to understand, if something is improvisatory, does that mean that it's unstructured? Does it mean that it's chaotic? Does it mean that it's just a gesture? Does it mean that it's a bad composition? So there's kind of a stereotype there, and I'm not saying the stereotype is necessarily wrong. I think that kind of implies that improvisation, though, is very limited. And I would say that there are a lot of artists who can improvise with tremendous structure. However, for myself, I don't think I'm one of those artists who is unlimited as an improviser. I don't think I'm like Keith Jarrett, for example. I have arrived at some answers to these questions for myself just at this point. And here's what I discovered through this process. I decided that for me, at least right now, I am best as a composer when I do the following. When I compose with tremendous structure, I have a jazz piece I presented in to our composers once that is like a puzzle. It was like carefully solving a very intricate puzzle and just working through every possibility. There are all these restrictions that I had on there. It's a piece that could only be composed. This is a jazz piece too, and then we improvise on that structure. But the piece that I wrote is very highly structured. There's architecture. Everything is choreographed to come to this huge climax. It's all worked out, and then we improvise with that. But I'm saying, as a composer, that I felt like that was my best composition. It's only something that could be composed. You could never improvise it because it was just too intricate and too worked out. On the other hand, as you could tell from this presentation, I've figured out that I'm best as an improviser when I have no restrictions, when there is no object, very little structure. So, and this was very difficult for me because I realized that when I'm working with my quintet, and I'll talk about the quintet stuff in a few minutes, when I'm working with my quintet, we're playing my pieces. I have to say, I don't know that I'm so great as an improviser in that situation. And the reason is because I say, okay, here's this piece I wrote. We're going to record this in 2 years, and I have a show coming up. And then I practice it for 2 years. And I wouldn't say that it's composed, but I do plan my solos with the quintet. I don't mean that I'm playing a prepared lick. I don't mean that any of the notes are planned, but I have a general plan. Like I say, oh, I'm going to start real quiet and do this kind of stuff. And then I'm going to build it up with these chords. And then I'm going to start bringing out octaves in the right hand and a huge climax and fast 16th notes come down. And then, Like I have a plan, and then I practice that plan over and over and over and over. And then I go to the recording and I try to do that object, right? And I feel like I usually fail at that. I'm not thrilled with how that goes. And so this really taught me, this solo project, what it means to truly improvise from nothing. And as I'll talk about a little later, I'm trying to figure out how to get that same freedom now with the quintet, how to bring what I've learned from this solo work to my quintet experience, to my guys in Seattle. So, and again, I want to point out some other people might be able to improvise with more structure. In a way, I guess I kind of reinforce the stereotype. I don't feel I improvise with tremendous structure. I know some people who can though, but I don't seem to do that. And I also think that along the same lines as playing music, I'm best as an improviser, making music that could only be improvised. That's the fundamental thing of this whole composition improvisation idea, is that some music can only be composed, like a Bach cantata. Thank heavens, Bach did not have a recording studio, because if he did, he probably just would have improvised. We know he was a fantastic improviser. His son, Wilhelm Friedman, said that his improvisations were much more sublime even than his compositions. He said his improvisations were fantastic, like unbelievable. I think if Bach had a recording studio, he would just record improvisations, but he didn't. So I'm so glad, because now we have the Bach cantatas and all these things that could only be composed. Now we have a choice. You take like John Coltrane in his quartet, the famous album was like A Love Supreme, you might have heard of. It's a very intense, fantastic album. And I just can't imagine that anybody could compose that. Maybe we could now, because it was 60 years ago and we know how he did it. But at that time, there was just no way that anybody could compose something like that. I won't really go into the details of why I think that, but I just don't think it's really possible. So it could only come from improvisation. So here's what I think is really interesting about this process, though, of when I was choosing these pieces, is that I found that I said that, does improvisatory mean that something is a bad composition? Well, it could be. When I was listening back to these improvisations that I recorded and trying to choose them, I felt that some of them sounded like bad compositions. I felt like, yeah, like if I don't know, it's just like a not very experienced student said, oh, I'm going to write a piece for piano and or camp with, or whatever. They wrote it. And so I thought to myself, well, that's very impressive that I improvised this bad composition, but that doesn't mean that I want to release it on this record label and play it for everybody. You know, and so I found pieces that were more processed. Now, there's also what's interesting. The last one that I played for you there, if you were listening closely, you might have noticed that it did seem a little bit more structured, maybe. I felt like it was a little more of an object. But here's the interesting thing about that. That last one that I played for that was on there has what I regard as an absolutely clear mistake. And I'm a music theorist. So when I say mistake, I mean like not a finger slip. I mean like something that is not right compositionally. I could talk about what that is, but it requires some theory knowledge. But basically, it was wrong. It was literally wrong to me. Well, what happened was I really liked it, and I talked to my engineer, and we were able to kind of subdue the mistake. So you can't get rid of it because it's just, but we were able to kind of soften the audio there and just kind of fuzz it out a little bit so it wasn't so glaring. And what ended up happening was that I really liked it because it sounds as if you are kind of wandering down these different paths in this improvisation, and one of them is kind of like the wrong path, like a little dead end in the woods or something, and that's the mistake. It's kind of like, oh, okay. and then we go back and explore the other one, and oh, that takes us to this final, that nice final chord that I played that feels really like the right ending. So the interesting thing about that is that, and it's sort of objectively wrong in that sense, but I like to think that what that means is that it's something that would only come from this improvisatory practice, because I would never, ever compose that because it was wrong. I would never, ever, ever compose those notes. I would just say, that's just not right. I wouldn't do it. So I like to think, to go back to how this all started, to this dinner with Paul Richards and the search committee, or some of the search committee members, you know, I guess I hope that in the end I said, hey, I could improvise that. The guy who came, right? I mean, the guy whose pieces we were reviewing, I said, I could improvise that. At the end of the day, I like to think that what I did in these albums is not the same as what, say, Paul Richards would do if he said, I'm going to write a bunch of piano preludes. I like to think that what I'm doing is a little different than what he would do if he did that, because there are these, maybe there are these mistakes. Maybe there are things that give it an improvisatory quality. As much as I think that's kind of a cliche and a stereotype, maybe there's, you know, a good side of that for me. So as you can see, it's a difficult subject, though, to kind of wrestle with these things, and it gets very subjective. So I'll ask again if you guys have questions, and then after that, I'm going to play some from volume 2, and then I'll talk about the quintet. So does anybody at this point have anything they want to ask? Be happy to. Yes, Don, please.
Okay. This is fascinating. In all my music studies, which have been considerable, I've never really thought about this pure process versus the object or the framework that most composers work under. But I have a couple of questions. First of all, if you were to take one of these purely improvised piano pieces that we just heard, and you were to analyze them as a music theorist would, in terms of harmonic structure and form, what would you find? Have you ever done that?
No, I have not. Although I've listened to them, so I guess. I mean, yeah. I mean, there's some interesting harmonies, I'm sure. But
Okay.
continue with your question.
Okay, and then you said just a moment ago that when you were working with this, you got to a situation where you felt like it was just the right ending. Okay, and you hadn't felt that way before. How do you describe what you mean by the right ending? Is it a suggested or actual harmonic progression? What is it?
Sure. Well, I mean, we'd have to go back and listen to that one again, which we could do, although I'm not sure I want to point out the mistake. I don't think I do, because as a theorist, I mean, it's a mistake. But
Yeah.
I think the right ending, I guess, was that I think in that piece I was kind of hinting at a key. I'm trying to think back in my head. Yeah, I think it was what's called an off tonic beginning, which means if we assume that the final chord was the tonic, I did not start with that. Yeah, so it's like kind of trying to find what key is this piece in, is probably what was happening while I was playing. I mean, intuitively, like, well, that's not. And then I finally found like the perfect resolution that felt like, that's what we want to hear, you know? And so, but I had some like misfires along the way. Yeah, something like that. Something like that, I guess.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Richard, did you want to ask a question?
I guess I'm stuck in terms of seeing pictures at the exhibition. When you were playing this last piece that showed solitude and calmness, I thought of Finlandia, and I guessed it, and then we go all the way back to Ives and get these little melodies that, like the Moldau and so forth, that brings up pictures in my mind. but I find I cannot get a picture of jazz. I get pictures in various symphonies, but jazz seems to be, even though it might seem to be structured, it's got a lot of variations that I can't get a picture of. And so it kind of raises the objective of the composer. Is he trying to tell a story, or is he trying to give me a mood with a picture, or is it just a academic exercise of theory following other people's improvisation, which might have a picture, but it's hard for me to see pictures in jazz. But clearly the great gate at Kiev and the pictures at the exhibition comes from the music. I mean, you cannot, but if the words were not there, I've only found that Sibelius's pictures, I can see a colder climate, I feel that. So I guess I'm trying to get familiar with academic exercises in improvisation that seems to occupy a good deal of time, but I guess I'm kind of such a novice that I'm trying to get a crutch to enjoy the music more. And what I find is I really love the pictures, but it needs to be induced either with a picture on the screen as you had, or music that is unequivocal, like the great gate at Kiev and the pictures in the exhibition. And then,
Sure. Yeah. Well, that's a good question, and I would say that yeah. I mean, of course, Mussorgsky is working directly from those images in that case. But I think a real question here also is the question of what is jazz. Of course, in the case of this album here, I don't hear. I'm curious if you guys hear jazz in it. I mean, I don't really hear it as jazz. Actually, it has been played on classical radio stations. This album is also a lot of jazz stations. But the question is like, what makes something jazz? In this case, it's improvised, so I guess that makes it jazz. But I'm not really working with a jazz language necessarily. If anything, and I was hoping to play some of Volume 2 here. There's very direct, it's much more directly classically influenced, I would say. I would also mention, I was going to say Volume 2 of this project is much more, I'm curious if we have time to play that and the quintet stuff. It is much more cinematic, I would say. It is much more visual. And in that case, I specifically curated the tracks into a dramatic arc, a sort of a personal narrative. And I find it is very, I do see images with that. I'm not sure that I see images necessarily as much with this album as well, but with that one, I do think it's moodier and just kind of going for that a little more. But yeah, I think that's an interesting point. And I think another thing to ask yourself is if this is a question about jazz versus classical, or about the traditional canon versus music composed in the 20th century or the 21st century. As you mentioned, a lot of improvisation seems academic, but of course, a lot of composition in the 21st century can be very academic and probably not creating images in that same way. I think a lot of it is kind of thinking about a tradition in that way. So, just kind of going back to the traditional canon of classical music, or the earlier days of jazz, where it was a little more commercial, I guess you could say. I don't know if that answers your question, but those are some thoughts that come to mind for me. So, are there any other questions?
Thank you.
Oh, Yeah, thank
very
you.
much.
Any other questions right now?
I think we're okay if you want to keep going.
Oh,
Okay.
Barb has a question.
Yeah, Barb, go ahead.
Yeah, I put it in the chat, but
Oh.
I asked it here. I just wanted to know, Rich, if you knew Dennis Marks. He up at University of North Florida. He's jazz bass, and he played with Sandoval, and he's the one who converted me from a straight classical person to jazz.
I don't know him. No, I do not. I'm afraid, but I should look him up for sure. I'm still relatively new to, not really to Florida. I guess I shouldn't say that anymore, but Florida's a big state. So there's a lot to
Well,
know.
Yeah, he's not that far away. He's up in Jacksonville, and
Yeah.
and he really it was very funny. He said, Barb, you don't like jazz? I said, well, he said, come to the concert. I guarantee you'll like it. And I did.
Wow. Was it a big band concert?
No, it was Sandoval with it was in South Florida when I lived down there. Small group. They traveled all over the country.
Wow.
But he's up
Awesome.
in North Florida now.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's really important to experience. I mean, I think with all these things, if someone says, I don't like classical music, it's like, if I could put you on stage with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra and Alexis Weisenberg playing the Rachmaninoff Second Piano Concerto, I just can't imagine you would be like, I don't like this. It's like, we have to have good experiences that really, that just, to sell you sometimes, and get you into something. It can be an acquired taste, all these things. Okay, well, why don't I go ahead and skip on to the quintet stuff. I was gonna play some from volume 2, but I'm not sure there's gonna be too many. I can play a little at the very end if people are interested. It is definitely different than the first volume. So the question I've been asking myself now is, how can I get back to some of the same, this feeling of being able to improvise more freely, but in a quintet or ensemble setting? Now, a lot of people do free jazz. It's not necessarily like truly free jazz is not really what I want to do. For a number of reasons, but it's not something that I really want to do. So I don't just want to show up with my band and have us play anything. That's not what I want to do. A lot of people do that, but I don't want to do that. So how can I do something that is the music that I want to make, but still have this freedom? Another big goal with my band has been to, as often as possible, to showcase the sound of the band overall. So everybody is improvising. And I guess what I'm saying is I have this idea of collective improvisation that I've done a lot with the band before, but what often happened, the way that I made it work, was that as the pianist, I wrote myself these patterns that I played over and over, or I would change them. And the patterns kind of locked down the harmony, they locked down the rhythm, they locked down the bass notes. And then I let everybody else do all their stuff around that. And it worked really well. I'll play you an example here. Another one is that piece I mentioned that was like a puzzle to compose. That's a little longer though, so I don't think we have time for that one. And this is actually a shorter version that I'm going to play you of this one. But I think you'll see it takes a little while to get all the way to the climactic part, but you'll see that eventually it's the whole band. We get this great sound of the whole band playing together. By the way, if any of you have your earbuds or anything, is that now would be the time to break those out if you have them. But I presume probably a lot of people don't have those. In any case, I'm going to play this, and as you'll see, I think I succeeded in getting the whole band sound, but I had to do so at the expense of my own freedom. And when I try to take solos in this context, I can't really do it, so I don't really take them, because it's very difficult to play a pattern like da 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 da, like a repetitive pattern in one hand while improvising freely in the other. It's extremely difficult. It can be done, but it's just it's crazy hard, and you know, I don't want to take that risk at a recording date, you know, so I just don't do that. Let me play this for you. This is called Hymn. This is off my second record called Episodes 4 through 6. And here it is. So I'm going to go here to Music, Rich Pellegrin Quintet, Episodes 4 through 6. And here we go. And again, you just listen for the repetitiveness of the piano, but the whole sound of the band being featured as it builds. Yeah, some glorious low bass notes there. So got to have the speakers for that, definitely, to get the full richness there. Okay, so I'm going to play one more thing here, I think. And this is a piece that is a little more, well, definitely a lot more abstract than that one. But it's because I think this is pointing to what I'm going to be doing next this summer. And what you're going to hear here is a experimental sort of cover of a minimalist piece called Piano Phase by Steve Reich. And what I found with this is that you might notice in the video that I played at the beginning that I was doing kind of drumming on the piano. And that's the same thing that I do in this track you're about to hear. And what I found was that by playing these kind of drumming patterns, I was able to improvise much more freely within the structure of what's laid out, the material that's laid out, but being able to have a lot more freedom and at the same time laying this foundation that allows the band to do what you heard on the track just now, which is they're all improvising together and creating this total band sound. You know, a lot of times in jazz, it's kind of like you have the rhythm section and then one guy gets up and plays their solo, and then the next guy gets up and plays theirs. So everyone's just kind of waiting their turn to take a solo. I'm trying to get away from that and have this whole band sound. This is off of my first record quite a while ago, but I think that this is exactly what I'm going to be returning to, is this kind of feeling where I'm sort of drumming on the piano, and by taking on the role of kind of a drummer, it allows everybody else to have more freedom. So I'm going to go ahead and play this last track for you. And this is very much the record I'm recording with my band this summer, is going to be very much in this same kind of vein. I particularly love the second half of this. The first half, especially if you don't have great speakers, the first half might sound a little, I don't know what, you can't quite hear the glue that's holding the thing together. The second half, though, you'll notice the horns start soaring above the texture together, and the drums are just free to do this, like all these textural kinds of ideas, really colorful textural playing rather than just keeping the time. And the horns are just really soaring, and I'm also improvising with this pattern and everything. And this is what I'm going to be trying to do next with my quintet. So here we go. Okay, there you have it. Looks like we have a few more minutes left for questions.
Okay, I'll go ahead and start. All right, Julianne. Yeah, this is Diane. I've been, I hesitate to say a musician for about 75 years. Started when I was quite young playing the cello, left it for a while, got back to it and so forth. As a musician, I have to have my music. You know, I don't improvise well at all. So I wondered, when you're working with your group, your quintet, right? Do you give them any music? I mean, to me, it sounds like you don't, because you don't really write it down. What do you say to them? Okay, we're going to do something in the key of D minor, and listen to what I'm doing, and then you can come in when you want to. Is that the way it is, or is there more structure than that?
Yeah, so this is part of what I'm trying to figure out. So the previous thing that I played for you from that was called Hymn, and a lot of the tracks there, it was very planned. I do give them lead sheets, which I don't have right on this computer, not this computer, so I can't share with you. Lead sheets, so that means the melody, the main melody that they play, the chord changes that we repeat. And also in the case of that one, it was very specific. Depending how close you're listening, you might have noticed, like, then the trumpet comes in with this, then the chord changes change a little bit, then another chord is added in. It was very similar, but there were little changes that was choreographing that climax that came, and it was actually very detailed. Of course, none of the notes that they're improvising are written out, but it just says, here's the chord changes, 4 measures of this, repeat it. Then we have a cue. Then we go to the next section, same chord changes, but with an extra chord thrown in at the end. Then the next thing says, okay, trumpet comes in with this line, then you start improvising. And so it's like very carefully set up to aim for that climax. With the one I just played for you, all I wrote down for them was that original pattern that Steve Reich composed. It's 12 notes. And I said, that's it. And we're going to do this. So, I mean, that's why I'm trying to get back to is I'm working on right now more things that are similar to that, where it's like a pattern that I start with, and that's all they're going to get is here's a pattern, and this is going to be a whole piece. So, you know, that's it. I mean, the thing is, they know what I want. They know my aesthetic values. They know what I'm trying to do in the band. I've talked to them a lot about that when we've been recording now for over 10 years, 13 years, I guess. So they know what I'm looking for. And when I say, here's the pattern, I mean, they are aware of what I'm asking them to do, I guess. But no, the idea is to just bring a very simple thing in and then be able to have that freedom, because it enables me to have a little more fun than when I'm just playing that repeated thing, like in the hymn, and then they do all this stuff. I want to have a little more creativity and spontaneity myself, so that we're all doing that, but within certain parameters. So they know that I like them to always stay in the key. So there's only like the 7 notes of the scale. I don't like it to be very chromatic. I don't like it to be like atonal usually, occasionally, but only like in a certain piece or something. So I like there to always be a clear pulse. I don't like it to be like free form rhythm. I like it to be, in that last one, there's, you know, so there's always that to hang on to. There's always that pattern, things like that. So yeah, part of jazz is having great musicians that you trust, and that you can, you know, tell them what you want, and also musicians that work well together as a band. And a huge part of, I think, being a jazz composer is putting together the band. I have so many things about the particular combination of musicians in this band that are very specific, like why it's these two and these, and you know, I could go on and on about that. I don't know if we have time, but lots of considerations in the creation of the band itself. Just think like Miles Davis too, one of the most famous band leaders, you know, really thinking very hard. He specifically had people that didn't get along as well sometimes, because he liked the feisty energy that they had, and just like the kind of the passion that kind of resulted from that. So it's a whole thing unto itself. Yeah.
So it's really the people, not the music
Yeah,
necessarily.
it is. Yeah. But also, yeah, having the vision and sort of, I guess it's like giving good lines to good actors, and then what can they do with it? You need to have, I guess, both. So the vision and the people who can carry out the vision. Yes, Don.
Yes, Rich. First of all, thank you so much for taking time from your very busy teaching schedule to spend this time with us.
Of course.
Leave us, would you be kind enough to talk just briefly about your musical journey, this trajectory that you've been on? What's informed your musical background? Who's influenced you, et cetera, to arrive at where you are today?
Well, that is unfortunately a long answer, so I'll have to give an abbreviated answer, or else you might just say, stop going on and on. But I think that's actually important, that it took me so long to figure out what I wanted to do, because jazz and improvised music is not really a part of, or not a huge part of academia. And when it is, it's always classical and jazz. Like the kind of music I played for you today isn't really part of academia very much, where I improvised solo piano, or like that last thing I played. We just hear like very traditional kind of jazz, I guess, in school, and that's fine. But that wasn't, I guess, what was going to work for me at some point, I figured out. So it's very hard to find your way, I guess, if you don't fit into a certain, the square peg in the round hole, I guess, syndrome. But I started out as a piano. I mean, I started playing piano when I was quite young, but I was not, like, I guess I was not doing it all the time or something like that. Classical music is by far completely my first love. My desert island music is the Bach cantatas, for sure. So, I mean, I have huge like passion for Coltrane and Miles Davis and many other things. But I mean, Bach to me is still the sort of the end all be all. I also think Bach was very jazzy, though. I'll say that. But yeah, so it was that I later became interested in percussion. I pretty much spent all of my teenage years only doing percussion. And during that time, I was exposed to a lot of other music. I mean, world musics and just lots of different things. And I think that was getting a lot of jazz as well. I wasn't playing it or anything, but I heard a lot of it. I think it's also, I think it was just maybe also the educational system at our school, like it just wasn't really emphasized very much. But it just always seemed like, I think it was pretty typical. It just seemed like something that other people do or other people can do. I just didn't really feel like fostered, I guess, in any way. But I do look back and realize that as a percussionist, I like to just, drum on things all the time. And so that improvisatory mindset was probably developing, just like any drummer, like taps on tables all the time. And that is just, and so that idea of, hey, I don't have to have music in front of me to do something, I think was probably really important. So I started college as a percussion major. I dropped that fairly quickly because, well, I won't go into it, but anyway, I stopped doing that as a major. I took up the harpsichord of all things, which was not a good thing to do after playing percussion, because I ended up with tendonitis. Unfortunately, yeah, just because it's opposite in the percussion is very visceral and physical, and the harpsichord, you cannot put any pressure into it or you break it, or you get sounds we don't want to have. So all of the energy was just kind of getting stuck into my arms, and various things like that also had to do with the teacher and things like that. But anyway, it was just very difficult. And I started getting into composition and things like that. And still I hadn't found, jazz and improvisation. And then eventually I felt like composition wasn't right for me, because maybe some of these things that I talked about, like the object and pursuing the object, I don't know. Eventually I started to figure out that improvising was working, and I got into jazz, and it was quite late actually in life, or late relative to other people. So yeah, it was a pretty varied background. And during some of that time, when my arms were injured and I wanted to compose, I was singing in choirs all the time to develop my ears. And so I became very interested in choral music. So just I have a wide background. I guess I like to think that that is something that can serve me well. And that, for example, on that piano phase track and in things I'm doing this summer, where I'm drumming on the piano, that I'm literally thinking about drum sets. I have, I can't show you now, but I have like drum sets on the piano, toms and cymbals and snare drum and bass drum. And I'm basically just thinking of it as like just jamming on a drum kit. And yeah, kind of like you could hear on, so, but yeah, that's the idea, is just, I'm trying to just kind of jam. And I think that's a fairly original idea. I haven't really heard anyone doing that sort of thing. And so, you know, hopefully this diverse background in the end will serve me to create some more unique music. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. We're so glad you found your way from Mizzou down here to Gatorland. Richard Petway and I have some shared experiences at Mizzou. So,
Oh, great. Okay.
you're here.
Fantastic.
I hope all of you will plan to join us next week when our guest will be James Oliverio. James is the Executive Director of the Digital World Institute. He'll be coming to us from the mountains of North Georgia, where he's on leave composing a piece at the commission of by the Cleveland Symphony Orchestra. So we look forward to seeing all of you next week. Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Rich.
Thank you all
Rich.
very much. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for your questions and attention.
Bye-bye.